One last question. There's a trend in America to go to a district judge to enjoin a law, federal law, a single district court judge stopping a federal law. Sometimes the left likes it, sometimes the right likes it. The Supreme Court is trying to get a handle on how to do that. How do you view, very quickly, each of you, issuing a national injunction as a district court judge?
Thank you, Senator. For a national injunction, I would refer to Civil Rule 65, and there is a standard that I would follow from that.
Would you be reluctant to do it?
And I would have to look at the specific facts of the case.
Okay. Does that pretty well sum it up for the rest of you?
Senator, I suspect we're going to get some guidance shortly from the Supreme Court.
Well, my advice, for whatever it's worth, and not much, is it be reluctant to do it. I know there are a lot of people on the right like it when we win, a lot of people on the left like it, but it's just, to me, seemed to be abuse of the process. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, Senator Graham. I might say that in order of arrival, we'll recognize Senator Booker, Senator Kennedy.
So in that regard, how do you say your name, sir? Michael?
Michael Farbiash.
Yeah, I got the Michael part. Okay. So along the line of terrorism, you know, it's kind of a different crime, still a crime, I guess. How would you, based on your experience, do the terrorists still want to kill us all?
Senator, I don't have a broad, systematic answer to that question. I've continued to follow national security.
Well, the ones you met, did they want to kill us all?
Senator, the ones I met were deeply motivated ideologically. People I met
To do what?
to kill Americans, Senator.
Okay. So do you believe that anything's changed since 2014, that the terrorist organizations that you're familiar with, one of their primary desires is to attack America? Do you believe that still to be the case?
Senator, I do believe that still is the case.
So we need to keep our guard up, right?
I agree with that, Senator.
Okay. Narcotics. Was there an intersection between international drug trafficking and terrorism?
Senator, I believe there was. During the years I worked as a prosecutor, I saw that firsthand.
Yeah. So, like, did you ever see any cases of drug cartels, say, in Mexico, working with terrorists?
I did, Senator, and I could give you an example. During the time I was an assistant United States attorney, one of the cases I worked very intensely on and that I oversaw was a plot by the IRGC in Iran to recruit a member of a drug cartel to kill the Saudi ambassador to the United States. It was an urgent and important case, and it was a case that resulted in a conviction, but I think it exemplifies, Senator, what you're speaking about, which is that nexus between narcotics sometimes and terrorist practices sometimes.
And in your experience in this area, ungoverned spaces is sort of a great deal for terrorist and narcotic organizations, right? When there's no law and order?
Senator, that was my experience. In addition to prosecuting terrorists, there was also prosecutions that I oversaw of narcotics traffickers from Afghanistan, from Colombia, who operated as warlords, who controlled territories, who controlled men and weapons, and were very dangerous.
Do you think there's the equivalent of warlords in Mexico?
Senator, I don't know that sitting here today. During the time that I worked on prosecutions, there were men who controlled space in Mexico, including a person who goes by the name Chapo, who the unit I supervised indicted.
Did you ever deal with any cases involving fentanyl?
Senator, I did not.
Are you familiar with the drug fentanyl?
I am, Senator.
Okay. Do you understand the deadly nature of it?
I do. In my current capacity, Senator, I'm the general counsel of a large public agency, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We have a police force of about 2,000 people, and one of our duties, one of the police's duties, is to police the bus terminal in New York City. It's the busiest bus terminal in the United States, second busiest in the world, and I know firsthand from the work that they do how deadly fentanyl is.
Okay. Well, you seem to be very qualified, and all of you, to be honest with you. Thank you, Mr. Delaney, very much. Now, What relationship, working relationship did you have with Senator Ayotte?
Thank you for the question, Senator Graham. I knew Senator Ayotte when we were both very young attorneys. We came together as homicide prosecutors and colleagues in the Criminal Justice Bureau of the Attorney General's office. We spent a lot of time together prosecuting cases, going out in the middle of the night to oversee death investigations. And when she was confirmed as Attorney General, she asked me at that time to serve as the sole Deputy Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire. I know her as a talented attorney. I know her as a dedicated public servant, and I've known her very well through the course of my career based on how we interacted with one another at the beginning of our careers.
Yeah, she gave a very glowing recommendation, which means a lot to me, and I hope the committee will look at her evaluation of your professional capabilities. In that job, I guess you worked a lot with police officers, is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I did, and New Hampshire is somewhat unique as Attorney General's offices go. Much like the state of Rhode Island, the Attorney General's office has significant authority to prosecute crime. So the Attorney General really does serve as the chief law enforcement officer of the state. In that capacity, I worked side by side with local police officers, police chiefs, and state officials, and certainly had interactions with the United States Marshal's Office, the FBI, Secret Service, and so many federal agencies. Appreciate so much what our men and women in uniform do to ensure.
In that regard, I think your nomination's being supported by different law enforcement groups from New Hampshire, is that correct?
That's correct, Senator Graham. The Association of the 10 county attorneys, lead prosecutors in the counties supported me. The New Hampshire Association of Chiefs of Police supported me. I'm grateful for their support, and I have several letters of support from former U.S. Marshals.
And I guess in the job that you've had, Attorney General, and working with Senator Ayotte, that you dealt with victims of crime, is that correct?
I did, Senator Graham. I dealt with them routinely. I listened to them as a frontline prosecutor. I advanced prosecutions against individuals that had taken away their loved ones. And when I became Attorney General, I tried to take those experiences and make differences for victims of crime in New Hampshire from a public policy standpoint.
What victim advocate groups are supporting your nomination from New Hampshire?
I've received letters of support from the Honorable Susan Carbon, who Senator Shaheen mentioned served as President Obama's Director of Victim Witness Assistance. I've received a letter of support from Christy Palestino McKinney. She served also nationally for the National Children's Alliance, which oversees quality assurance for the child advocacy centers that provide services for child sexual abuse victims. I've received letters of support from the current State Director of Victim Witness Assistance for New Hampshire, as well as the former Director of Victim Witness in New Hampshire, as well as all of the advocates I worked on the front line with in my career as a prosecutor.
During the civil litigation that Senator Durbin mentioned, your law firm was representing schools and school districts, is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
All right. Can you assure this committee that if you're a judge, that every victim will be heard by you?
I can assure the committee of that, Senator. I think it is critically important for a judge to hear from victims and from all parties that have been impacted by a case. So I would commit to listening to victims very closely while fairly and impartially deciding the cases before me.
Well, apparently the people who are, close to victims in New Hampshire have confidence in you and your judgment. So I appreciate your willingness to come before the committee, and congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Graham. Senator Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Counselor, congratulations.
Article, I don't know how to describe it, for the California Coalition on Sexual Offending regarding residency restrictions for convicted sex offenders. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What is the California Coalition on Sexual Offending? What is that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. The California Coalition on Sexual Offending is a multidisciplinary nonprofit group that has as its goal the end of sexual assault.
Okay. What was in your paper, you suggested that limiting residency requirements of sex offenders, certain statutes, can't live near schools and other things. You didn't agree with that, is that correct?
Thank you again for the question, Senator. I did co-author that position paper in which a group of us asked the legislature to take a look at several proposals, including residence restrictions. Our fear at that time, along with the fear of our allies in the victim rights community and in law enforcement, was that in some cases, the residence restrictions were actually hindering public safety, which of course was the opposite of of the goal.
How does it hinder public safety?
In some instances, residence restrictions resulted in convicted sex offenders being homeless, which presents a huge challenge to law enforcement.
Well, the statutes don't deny people the ability to live at all. It's just restrictions around schools and places where children gather. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I think here's a line. Difficult as it might be, laws that regulate where sex offenders may not live should be repealed or substantially modified in interest of public safety. I still don't understand how that makes you homeless.
Thank you for the question. I think it was an unintended consequence of some of these laws.
So are you saying that if we don't allow sex offenders to live in areas where children gather like schools, that we're creating a homeless problem?
The position of that paper, again, an allyship with law enforcement and victim rights advocacy groups.
What law enforcement groups were pushing this?
There's parole and probation in San Diego were having a very difficult time at that time monitoring sex offenders as they were required to do.
Why were they having a difficult time monitoring sex offenders?
I think the way that they would put it, Senator, is that a homeless sex offender is more difficult.
I don't buy the proposition that a legislative body saying registered sex offenders. Are you okay with registering sex offenders?
Pardon me?
Are you okay with a registry for sex offenders so the public knows what this person did?
Sex offender registration is the law, Senator.
Are you okay with that?
Whether or not I am or not as a sitting
Well, no, wait a
judge.
minute. It's really important to me because the point I'm trying to make here is the argument that the laws restricting where a registered sex offender can live leads to homelessness makes zero sense to me.
Right.
Thank you.
Graham?
Thank you. Ms. Swear, let's revisit, is it the Rahimi case? Is that the right name?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
Okay. Let's see what is the most compelling thing to learn from that case. How many times was this gentleman involved with shooting at people?
I'm not sure in total, but it seems like at least 6 or 7.
Okay, and he was released based on what charge? He was facing a charge and released?
The first time he was facing at least 1 felony domestic violence charge and 2 others. I'm not sure whether they were misdemeanors or felonies under Texas law.
Okay. Is it pretty fair to say that this guy should not have been out on the streets?
Absolutely not. He was very clearly a danger to both specific individuals and the public at large.
Mr. Manguel, is this a common problem where our criminal justice system has a revolving door when it comes to people who are exhibiting violent behavior?
It most certainly is a common problem, and one that is a long-standing problem as well. I mean, one of the statistics I didn't get a chance to get to was that between 1990 and 2002, the Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that over a third of individuals convicted of violent felonies were either out on probation, parole, or pretrial release at the time of those offenses. As our criminal justice system has gotten softer, that problem's only gotten bigger.
So when you look at what America is facing, would you agree with me the best thing we could do as a nation is to make sure that our parole laws and our attitude toward violent criminals is changed so that they are not out hurting people, they stay in jail?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, one of the biggest challenges that we currently face, as evidenced by the data on the role that repeat offenders play in serious gun violence, is that we are systematically failing to draw and enforce a line as to how much repeated criminal conduct we are willing to accept and tolerate.
Well, if your proposition is true, America would be responding in a certain way. Do you realize, Ms. Swear, that from 1991 to 2019, the number of guns in America number of weapons owned by Americans has doubled?
I am aware of that, yes, Senator.
Do you are aware of the fact the number of concealed carry permits have increased by 7-fold?
I know it has increased exponentially. I will take you at your word that it's roughly 7-fold.
Are you aware that between 2019 and 2020, 58% increase in gun purchases by African Americans, 43% increase by Asians, 46% increase in purchases by Latino Americans, 40% of those purchases are made by first-time gun buyers? Are you aware that from 2005 to 2020, a 77% increase in gun ownership by women, and that from 2019 to 2020, a majority of people buying guns were women? Are you aware of all that?
Yes, Senator, I am.
Why do you think that's going on?
It's because there are a lot of Americans, specifically, as you mentioned, women and ethnic minorities, who, a lot of them for the first time in their lives, beginning in the last couple of years, looked around at the state of reality in this country with sort of widespread and issues with policing, with...
Well, let's just stop there for a moment. Mr. Lindley, you've been a police officer. Thank you for your service. How's morale among police in America, generally speaking?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think overall, morale is decreasing.
Yeah, and there are probably a lot of reasons for that, but it's harder to get people into law enforcement now, and I'd like to work with people to try to change that. Mr. Rubin, do you agree with the Heller decision that interpreted the Second Amendment to be an individual right? Was that a good legal decision?
Yes, sir.
You do? Yes. Yeah, thank you. Ms. Glenn, your experience was terrible. Your husband, former husband, had been charged with armed robbery. Had he been convicted of armed robbery, or I don't know, make sure I got
Yes, many years before the incident, yes.
Okay, and he had actually been charged with kidnapping you too,
Yes.
before the shooting.
Months before the incident.
Yeah, so I guess here's my point. Senator Cornyn has shown the way to work on responsible gun ownership limitations. I don't think there's anything in this case that says common sense doesn't prevail. But this Bruin case and Heller case are important in my view. Mr. Chairman, it reinforced the idea that the Second Amendment is there for individuals and that individuals have a right to defend themselves in a responsible way, even outside their home. So what I would hope this committee could do is end, to the extent possible, the revolving door policies that allow people time and time again to come back out on the streets, hurt their fellow citizens. In this situation, I would just add in conclusion, the reason so many people are buying guns is because they've lost faith in their government to protect them. Thank you. Just to put a fine point on this, is it DOD? Are they the problem?
Well, Senator, as I indicated, I think the discussions about how to use the authority that Congress is given.
Nope. You're going to answer this question. Is DOD the problem?
I really don't think, Senator, respectfully, it's appropriate for me to comment on internal discussions.
We have a law on the books. I've been told by people who care that the intel is not flowing, as Senator Durbin described, because of the Department of Defense. I think you need to answer that question.
Well, Senator, what I could tell you is I'm aware of longstanding concerns based on prior positions that I've held that the Department of Defense has raised.
I share Senator Durbin's view that we've done this the right way. I understand his historical precedent. We're not jeopardizing any American soldier. We're talking about evidence involving foreign nationals in a specific theater of operation. Every law we passed has been completely bipartisan. We're 400 and some days into this war, and I'm going to ask you again, is the Department of Defense the holdup?
Senator, I know the Department of Defense has had longstanding concerns about our engagement.
I don't care what their concerns are. They can share them with me. We got a law on the books. Do you feel like you need to follow the law when you're told to do it?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. So we'll take this up with the Department of Defense. Do you believe that China is watching what's happening in Russia and Ukraine?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Okay. There's reports that China may be considering providing lethal aid to Russia. Have you seen those public reports?
I've seen public reports in that regard, Senator.
Don't you think we should do everything we can to deter China from helping Russia with their barbaric invasion of Ukraine?
There is no doubt that rogue nations of the world, including China, are watching and learning from what is going on. And as I laid out in my opening comments, and as both the chairman and you, Mr. Ranking Member, have laid out, what Russia is doing in Ukraine poses a threat to global peace, global stability, precisely because if it goes unchecked, if there is not accountability, there is no deterrent. There will be license for that type of unlawful aggression.
Well,
and we have to make sure that that price is quite steep.
To those of us on this side who object to defunding the police, I think you're right to do so. When you give the streets to the crooks, you're going to get more crime. So I would say that when you allow Putin to get away with rape and murder and pillage, you're going to get more of the same. This is not a territorial dispute between Russia and Ukraine, is it?
I think this is Russia trying to project its power in a brutal way.
Are you aware that Putin has said he would like to reconstruct a former Russian Empire, Soviet Union?
Absolutely, and we
Are
know.
you aware of the fact that the Ukrainians in the mid-90s gave up 1,700 nuclear weapons as part of an agreement with Russia, the United States, and Great Britain that their sovereignty would be honored if they gave the nukes back to Russia?
Yes, Senator.
Is it fair to say that Putin has torn that agreement up by his actions?
Putin is acting in a lawless way, in violation of anything.
Is it fair to say that if you want people to have less nuclear weapons, you need to honor agreements when they give up the nuclear weapons they possess?
Absolutely. It's what our international order
You
is
agree
based
with me
on.
if Ukraine could go back in time, they would keep the nukes?
Can't speculate on that,
Yeah,
Senator.
I think they would. So to those who think the border is broken, I want to fix it. To those who think what happens in Russia doesn't matter, regarding China, you've missed all of World War II. To those who believe that if Putin gets away with this, it won't matter, you're going to get more of it from other people. The ICC has issued an arrest warrant for the president of Russia. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am.
If Interpol would issue a red notice for the arrest of Putin, would we honor it?
Well, Senator, I think that presumes, which I think is a vanishingly slim possibility, that
No, I got
Putin
it, but
would
the
come
point
here.
is, would we consider him a criminal and honor the red notice if issued?
Well, we certainly consider him a criminal, consider him a war criminal. As you know, Senator, that the arrest warrant.
You know what a red notice is?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Do you think it would be justified for Interpol to issue a red notice against Putin?
I think it's certainly justified. I think what it would do is have to go through the process. The ICC, I think, as a practical matter, could ask for Interpol to issue that red
Would you
notice.
support them asking for it?
I think they're a party to Interpol, and they can use they've got an agreement to
Thank you.
use those mechanisms.
And thank you. The Klepto Capture Task Force has done an amazing job. Well done.
Thank you very much, Senator. They've been working very, very hard.
Thanks, Senator Graham. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me pick up where Senator Graham left off.
Congratulations to both of you and your families. Judge Alba, are you familiar with do you remember the case United States versus Hernandez-Fields? It's a child pornography case.
Senator, yes, I vaguely remember that case.
Okay. According to my records here, the defendant was convicted of receiving and distributing child pornography, including images of children being sexually abused, images of young minors as young as toddlers having objects inserted into their bodies in a sadistic manner. The sentencing guidelines range from 78 to 97 months. The government asked for a 97-month sentence. The parole officer originally recommended 111 months, but then revised it down to 66 months. And apparently the defendant told the parole officer they had no sexual interest in children. That seems to defy the facts of the case. You imposed a sentence of 66 months. And I would encourage the members of the committee to look at the record if they so choose. Why did you do that?
Senator, as a federal district judge, whenever I impose a sentence, I am required to do an individualized assessment. I need to look at the factors at 18 U.S. Code Section 3553A, as well as looking at the probation's pre-sentence report, any objections thereto, the request from the defense and from the government, any victim impact statements, and any letters in support, or in that situation as well, any...
In that regard, do you remember the government telling the court the defendant's conduct reveals that he is an extreme risk to minors? Do you remember that?
I don't recall the specifics, Senator, but I do know that I am required to do an individualized assessment, and I did look at everything that was provided to me in that case, as I'm required to by both Ninth Circuit precedent, Supreme Court precedent, and the factors at 18 U.S. Code 3553A.
Are you aware of the fact that when he told the parole officer he has no sexual interest in children, that he had told psychologists and law enforcement the opposite? Do you believe this defendant had no sexual interest in children?
Do I independently believe that?
I mean, as a judge, did you buy what he was saying?
No, Senator.
Okay. All right. Do you remember a case involving taking a GPS monitoring device off a defendant who was convicted of helping his brother evade capture? His brother had killed a police officer, Corporal Singe, and he had been wearing this monitoring device for 4 years. You decided to replace or take the monitoring device off of this defendant without a hearing. Do you recall that?
I do not recall that case, Senator.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
We're not, okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to speak for just a few minutes here. Number one, the judge we just confirmed, I think, to the 11th Judicial Circuit, Ms. Abudu, is an example of the system being broken. This nominee that I voted against in committee is way beyond what I think the market should be bearing. Is, my view, a partisan's dream. It's okay to be a litigant in causes I don't agree with. It's okay to represent organizations that I differ with. I don't hold the client against a lawyer, but I do hold positions against the lawyer when it comes to cause-driven litigation. This nominee at every turn has taken the left fork in the road to the point of being in the ditch. As a lawyer, she sued a Florida community who were trying to protect children from sexual predators by having requirements of notice, but also being away from schools, certain distances, and she sued the community, basically claiming that was unfair to the sexual abuser. It's moments like this that should be a wake-up call for this body. Her record as an advocate is not just representing liberal causes, but the rhetoric used and the arguments made convinced me in committee that this is an activist on steroids, and I've tried to work with my Democratic colleagues, voting for circuit and district court judges, understanding that Democrats would pick someone I would not choose. That's the way the system works. But in this case, it was a partisan vote. Not one Republican voted for this nominee, and her record, I think, is one of activism and stridency that will, in my view, shape her time as a judge and shape the court in a way that is inconsistent with the rule of law as I know it. So to my Democratic colleagues, you have confirmed this nominee, but I'm sure this is not the last we'll hear about Mrs. Abudi. Today, it was announced that Rachel Rollins, the U.S. Attorney from Massachusetts, is going to resign, I think. She's under investigation for unethical behavior and using her office for revenge. She is one of the few, maybe the only, U.S. attorney that I voted against in this Congress. There may have been one other, but it was pretty obvious to those of us on the committee that the warning signs regarding Ms. Rollins were rampant and that we were buying a problem. And the point I'm trying to make to my colleagues is after we change the rules of confirmation, you don't need one vote from the other side if you have a majority. And there'll come a day maybe where we find ourselves in that situation. I always have worried that doing away with the collaborative process to get a nominee to move forward, judges or U.S. attorneys, is going to create a problem where you're down to picking people who have the most vocal support from the most active extreme elements in both parties. And I think this is a case, Exhibit A, of Ms. Rollins. And to my colleagues, all of us are going to have to understand that I respect the home state senator's ability to nominate district court judges. The blue slip process I will honor for district court judges, U.S. attorneys, but it puts pressure on us to up our game. And Ms. Rollins, I voted against in committee, and it was obvious that our concerns were justified. Mr. Delaney, nominated for the 1st Judicial Circuit, performed poorly in the committee. He represented a private school that was sued for allowing sexual harassment to be unchecked and to be covered up. It's okay to represent unpopular causes. Everybody needs a lawyer. But his answers about how he engaged one of the plaintiffs, a minor at the time, were terrible. And it seems to me that he would have been better prepared. And he had a lot of support from people in New Hampshire, some on our side of the aisle. But I guess my point is you have to be prepared to answer hard questions. and Mr. Delaney was woefully unprepared. And to my colleagues on the Republican side, I think you've done a very good job of asking hard but relevant questions to the nominees before our committee. And we've had a lot of bipartisan support for judges, and we've had some opposition. As to moving forward, I hope the White House will prepare these nominees better. The basic understanding of the Constitution, of a litigant practice, basic concepts of the law like Brady motions, just how the Constitution is set up, is not too much to ask of people who want to be a judge for the rest of their life. So, to the White House, this process needs to change. You need to up your game. Your goal, I think, should be to try to find people that some of us can vote for on the Republican side, and when they get in front of the committee, make a good impression. I'm not saying we did it all right on our side when we were in charge. Probably examples where we didn't. But I tried to make sure that some people that were nominated didn't make it because some of us on the Republican side said no. There's more than a handful of judges coming out of the committee that I think should not be on the bench. And I say that with the understanding that my inclination is to vote for judges nominated by the other side, assuming that that's what I would like to happen when it comes our turn, that if we all vote against the other party's judges, then you're going to put the judiciary in a world of hurt if we ever have a president of one party and a Senate made up of the other, and that's sort of, we'll be there one day. And given the behavior of the body, I don't know how we deal with that. But between now and then, I'm hoping that there will be more serious deliberation, my colleagues on the Democratic side, to make sure that the people we're putting forward can answer basic questions. And sometimes maybe we ask bad questions, but I don't believe that the questions being asked of these nominees are unfair, and it just is stunning that people have been in the law as long as some of these nominees can't ask the basics. So this idea that you're going to come through the Judiciary Committee and not be asked hard, relevant questions, I hope that has gone by the wayside. The idea that I will support Democratic nominees is real up to a point. And there have been several of us on this side who've probably voted for more Democratic nominees than we've opposed. And I would try to continue to honor the process. I want to keep the blue slip in place. So I'm asking colleagues from red states to work with the White House to see if they can find consensus. When I was chairman, there was a lot of pressure on me to do away the blue slip so we could nominate anybody we wanted to at the district court level. If you had 2 Democratic senators in the state, the blue slip would go away. We could nominate anybody we wanted to. I think that's bad for the Senate. I think that over time would be bad for the judiciary. I didn't change the process. I don't want it changed now. And I do expect us on the Republican side to collaborate with the White House and find consensus where you can. But having said that, the last several months sort of been a disaster for the committee in the sense that the people are not prepared, and you're picking folks that are really shouldn't have lifetime appointments from my point of view, and we can pass them on party lines and make this problem worse, or you can get a handful of Democrats to do what I've done in the past, not only vote yes, but sometimes say no. And Mr. Delaney, I think, will probably fall by the wayside. And I say that with no animosity toward him. I just think that's the right outcome here. So if that does happen, I would want to applaud the White House for understanding that sometimes you can't go beyond what the market would bear. And I've shown a disposition and a willingness to work with you. But the recent nominee we just passed is way out of the mainstream. And I'm hoping that we can get back on track, have nominees come before the committee that are prepared to make it, quite frankly, easier to find consensus. And if that doesn't happen, we're going to have less consensus, and there's a handful of nominees waiting to come to the floor that I will vigorously oppose because I think they're not qualified. So with that, Mr. President, I wish you a great break and hope we can go home and do our business at home and abroad, wherever that takes us, and come back safely. And with that, I yield the floor. Thank you very much. Judge, Ms. Khan, Ali Khan, you were the solicitor for the D.C., is that right? Solicitor General for D.C.?
Yes.
One of the issues you got involved in was Safe House versus DOJ. Do you remember that?
Yes, Senator.
And I think you took a position advocating for safe injection sites for drug users.
The position that we took in that brief that was joined by, I believe, 15 or 16 states was that the opioid crisis affects different jurisdictions differently, and we're all trying and should be looking to novel solutions. And Philadelphia thought that for its the nature of its opioid problem, that a safe injection site might be one of those novel solutions. And so as states that are all facing the terrible ravages of fentanyl and heroin, we wanted to give them that latitude and support their ability to experiment in ways of curbing this crisis.
You think there's a safe way to take fentanyl?
Senator, our brief was not to recommend any particular type of safe injection site. It was to say that if Philadelphia thought that that was one way of assisting their community with the opioid crisis, that they should have the latitude.
Would you be okay with a state basically allowing people to take fentanyl under state supervision?
Senator, until we are able to get the opioid crisis under control, I think we need to give users
Do you think that's
the resources
getting it under
they need.
control, allowing state supervised use of one of the most deadly drugs known to man?
The site that Philadelphia had proposed had treatment services. It had overdose prevention.
How do you view fentanyl?
I think fentanyl is a nationwide crisis, Senator.
I mean, in terms of the danger fentanyl presents to an individual, those surrounding the individual.
I think it's quite dangerous.
Okay. Any of his time. Ms. Munley, Judge Munley, we have some common friends. Don McGann, is that a family friend? Is that correct?
My nephew.
Okay, well, I guess you can still be friends and having it.
He's a friend.
Okay. Bottom line, you have very little criminal practice. Is that true?
Senator, over the course of my 20 years as a trial lawyer, I handled criminal cases. I handled DUI cases. I sat third or fourth chair in a bench murder trial and did all the brief writing for that, including the appellate brief writing, as well as handling criminal juvenile cases.
So you feel like you're conversant in criminal law?
I am completely confident, Senator, if I have the honor of being confirmed in handling any criminal case that comes before me as a trial judge. I've handled criminal cases to verdict, so would be completely confident in handling any criminal case assigned to me.
Thank you very much.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to just begin by...
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I try to be open-minded and broad-minded about nominations. I'm even willing to consider 2 people from the Navy, which is a stretch for me. But anyway, I can see why you have support of your senators. You seem to be incredibly bothly talented and dedicated to the law and to the country, so congratulations to you and your family. My view of this process is to try to find out if you're qualified and not to replace my judgment for yours on political issues, and just to make sure that, you know, you're well-rounded in the law, and I think you both are. And I was a military defense attorney. I didn't get to pick my clients. They came over the office, and once they were there, I did my best. Mr. Federico, I think you represented some 9/11 defendants, is that right?
Yes, Senator, one 9/11 defendant.
Tell me about that.
Senator, I reported the Office of Military Commissions Defense in 2008 in the spring. As you may recall, and I know you worked hard on those policy issues, that was after the passage of the Military Commissions Act of 2006. That was when the 9/11 case was first charged. I learned on my first day in the office from my military leadership that I would be detailed to that case. I didn't know going in that was one of the cases I would work on. Of course, I then found it to be both...
Was it fair to say you did your best and gave it your all?
Yes, Senator, I did.
Okay. Mr. Culler, your time in the Navy, how's that prepared you for what awaits you, you think?
Senator Graham, it's prepared me in a number of ways. First, the ongoing service of the people that I've had the honor of serving with really does inspire me, even as I do my civilian job. Second, when I'm in uniform, I have a chain of command, and it's important that I follow that chain of command. And I feel the same way when I'm in chambers. My job is to follow the chain of command, follow binding precedent, both as a naval intelligence officer and as a judge. I try to make sure that I'm rigorously analyzing anything that comes before me and taking into account all relevant facts. And in the end, I do my job within that chain of command, and I'm inspired to do so by those with whom I'm served.
So let me ask you about problems our nation faces. Do you believe that ISIS and other radical Islamic groups represent a threat to the United States?
Senator, I've prosecuted cases involving ISIS and other terrorist organizations where people were inspired by rhetoric that certainly can cause a danger to the United States and violates multiple federal laws that this body has passed.
You agree to that, Mr. Federico?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, so even though we're in an undeclared war, the enemy is out there. Are you familiar with the term enemy combatant, both of you?
Yes, Senator, I am.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Could you very briefly explain what an enemy combatant is?
Senator, under the Geneva Conventions in particular, you designate persons as combatants and non-combatants. An enemy combatant is a person who has the status as a combatant, but of course is an opposing force.
We have people held at Guantanamo Bay now under the designation as enemy combatants. Are you both familiar with that?
Yes, Senator.
Yes, Senator.
Okay. Our Supreme Court has reviewed those cases.
Yes, Senator.
You agree? Okay. Under the law of war, can an enemy combatant be held off the battlefield as long as they're a threat to our nation?
Senator, I'll say under the law of armed conflict, it has always been that you can detain enemy combatants through the duration of hostilities.
Mr. Culler?
It's accurate, Senator.
Okay. Do you know when this war is going to be over?
I hope as soon as possible, Senator.
But do you agree with me it's ongoing?
Senator, we've had declared certain wars in certain theaters are over. I agree with you, however, that there are still enemies out there and that there is still active armed conflict in certain areas.
You agree with that, Mr. Culler?
I agree with that, Senator. The duration of the hostilities is determined by the President and in certain instances this body as well.
Thank you very much.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to ask you each two sets of questions because I know my colleagues have questions to ask. Mr.
Chairman, today the Massachusetts governor is calling out the National Guard because they're being overwhelmed with migrants, illegal immigrants. The solution is to keep them all in Texas and take the pressure off other people. That's not going to work. The solution is to stop the invasion of this country of illegal immigrants by changing policy. I have been very open to comprehensive immigration reform, but it's to the point now where it's incredibly dangerous. ISIS connected smugglers 2 weeks ago are bringing people into our country. That's not a good thing. New York City is begging for relief, and the relief is not going to be stick it to Texas. That's not going to be the relief. So I'm urging this committee to take up, in an emergency fashion, a solution to our border problems before it is too late. As to the markup, Ms. Milichek, I think is her name, from Pennsylvania. I tend to vote almost unanimously for district court judges. I've got my own view of things. I don't expect people to follow my lead, but I'm going to follow my lead. But when I don't vote for a district judge, I think I have a good reason. This is one of the worst picks imaginable. Been overruled constantly based on her decisions as a judge, and set aside the conviction of the president of Penn State, who was integrally involved in the Sandusky debacle in terms of covering up, and her decision was reinstated unanimously by the Court of Appeals. This is not the person should be promoted. So I will vote no, and I'll urge anybody who's out there trying to figure out what to do on the floor, look at this case.
Thank you, Senator. And let me add to your statement, the decision by the...
Kazabai, in 2020, while you were a magistrate judge, you apparently gave a speech stating that Ibram Kendi is an amazing historian and author, and he does important work in the history of the construction of race. You wrote a book, am I right, called How to Be an Anti-Racist?
Senator, I want to make sure I understood the question. I didn't write a book.
Article? What was it?
I believe the author, Ibram Kendi, wrote a book about how to be an anti-racist.
Okay, I'm sorry, yeah. So you cite him in this speech, and here's what he argues, that the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. Do you agree with that?
Senator, discrimination in the treatment of treating anyone negatively is not appropriate, and our courts, through the Student for Fair Admissions, has also clarified that as a national guidepost.
So you don't agree with that?
The statement that you meet discrimination with discrimination is not part of what our courts should be upholding. It has been clear in our guidance from the Supreme Court as well.
So you do not agree with Mr. Kendi's proposition as I read it to you?
That is correct.
Okay. Tell me about is it a pamphlet of your court? I think you created Pronouns in the Court Guide. Tell me about that.
I developed what's often called sort of a cheat sheet for the bench of just the simple prescriptions or language that I could use to ensure access to the courts, that everybody who comes before the court can be acknowledged and identified in dignified ways, and that related to the issue of the use of pronouns and honorifics, such as Mr. or Miss or Mix, and for that matter, Mrs. And so I invite people, when they come to court and introduce themselves, to offer their identity in the way of their honorifics.
Is that practice used by other judges, or do you know?
I know that other judges identify their pronouns, for example, in their signature emails, and that other judges throughout the state in Oregon encourage people to identify their pronouns when coming into court, so they also can ensure that people are dignified by identifying themselves in the courtroom.
I can't say the name of I guess it's the plaintiff here. Somebody versus the city of Eugene. Are you familiar with that case? Boudjerada.
Boudjerada.
Yeah. That case, did that case come before you? Did you rule that Eugene, Oregon's citywide curfew in response to rioting and looting and acts of violence was unconstitutional?
Senator, under the First Amendment, and that was the structure and the analysis in that case, involved a time, place, and manner restriction on protests.
Do you think you appropriately applied existing President of Oregon law to this case?
In every instance, Senator, I strive to apply binding precedent from the Ninth Circuit as well as the Supreme Court.
Well, this one to me seems like legal gymnastics to get around the most recent case in Oregon, but that's just my opinion. Further along, in this same case, you recently ruled, I think, Eugene's city manager and police chief are not entitled to qualified immunity regarding their decision to implement the curfew. Is that correct?
In that follow-up opinion, after analyzing the issues of First Amendment and the time, place, and manner restrictions, I subsequently considered the issues with respect to several 1983 claims against individual officers, as well as the chief of police and the city manager. In that opinion, I found that the individual officers were not subject to suit because of qualified immunity. But
well, I didn't ask you that. I asked you about the police chief.
And with respect to the police chief and the city manager, with the actions that were taken in light of what I determined to be a clear violation of a constitutional right.
One last question. How would you describe the violence and the destruction of property in Eugene, Oregon? How would you describe that?
Senator, violence and destruction of property anywhere
would you consider it a riot?
Senator, the facts before me were involving the issues of whether the citywide curfew, as opposed to a curfew within narrow boundaries, was constitutionally appropriate.
Well, I would encourage my colleagues to look at this particular scenario and make your own decision whether or not a curfew was justified. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. You did legal work for Huawei, is that correct?
I did. When I was in private practice a number of years ago, I did a small amount of work at the best of my
So it's pretty well the policy of the United States to tell our allies that if you buy Huawei technology, we're not going to do business with you because we think Huawei is an extension of the Communist Party and it would get into all of our data and it would be a national security threat. We've actually told allies, if you join Huawei, we're going to shut down sharing with you. Are you familiar with that?
I'm aware of some of the work the United States government.
Based on what you know about Huawei, is that sound policy?
Senator, I think I did a small amount of work for Huawei a number of years ago.
No, that's not my question. You did a small amount of work for Huawei. I'm not holding your client against you. I just want to understand, do you know who you're representing here?
Yeah,
I mean, Huawei is considered by our government a threat. So if you're an ally of the United States and you buy the Huawei systems, we're going to shut down sharing information. That's the policy that I support. Does that make sense to you, given what you know about Huawei?
Senator, a lot of time has passed since I represented Huawei. Things have changed. I have no reason to second guess the policy of the United States in this ground. And I think more importantly for my current role is for the role of the
during your
nominee
time representing them, did the way they do business give you any concerns along those lines?
Yes,
I mean, Huawei is owned by the Communist Party, basically, right?
Senator, I can't remember my thinking at the time.
Yeah.
What I can say is that OLC is not a policymaking office. And
I got you. The Hong Kong Trade Development Council. So you're familiar with those folks, right?
Much like Huawei, I did a small amount of work for them.
Yeah. So during 2019, the government of Hong Kong went hard against pro-democracy protesters, and the Hong Kong Trade Development Council seems to be behind the governor of Hong Kong, whatever you call the guy. Did you ever say anything to them about what's going on in terms of this will not good?
Senator, my work for the Hong Kong Trade Development Council, much like my work for Huawei, was done at the request of other partners, and
I
had
understand
no
that.
interaction
I mean,
with.
everybody deserves a lawyer. I mean, trust me, I've represented people I don't agree with. That's not the point. The point is, it seems to me that during 2019, was a crucial time for democracy in Hong Kong. And that was a time I would expect people to stand up and be counted, not provide comfort. So did you ever, or anybody in your firm, ever suggest to the Chinese Hong Kong Trade Council that what you're doing is going to put you on the wrong side of the United States and out of line with international law?
I can't speak for everyone at my firm. I had no direct interaction with them, so.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fonz.
Till, I think the committee received a letter from the United UKB. How do you say the K?
Katua.
Questioning your impartiality and your ability to serve. What would you say?
I would say, certainly there's been a fair amount of litigation between the Cherokee Nation and the United Katua Band. And in that litigation, I represented my client to the best of my ability, which is my job and duty. Certainly, taking on the role of federal district judge is one that leaves behind the life of advocacy and embraces the job and the life of a jurist, one who takes the case before them and looks at them fairly impartially and applies to a lot of the facts. And I understand very much that that's the job of the district judge and not to serve as an advocate.
Okay. Are you familiar with called a corrupt bargain? The allegation of corrupt bargain between the Cherokee Federal and HHS concerning construction of a migrant detention center. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. I'm familiar with the attempt to construct a migrant facility that.
But you had nothing to do with that.
No, that was done by Cherokee Nation businesses.
Okay, as an advocate for the Cherokee Nation, obviously you have to represent your client with vigor, and I think that's what all lawyers do. The two senators speak very well of you. When it comes to the Dakota pipeline, can you tell me your position regarding that?
So when the Dakota Access Pipeline was, the dispute in Indian country arose with the Standing Rock Reservation, I was the Secretary of Natural Resources for the Cherokee Nation. The legislature, the elected leaders of the Cherokee Nation passed resolutions in support of the Standing Rock tribe. And so as part of a delegation of the Cherokee Nation, I participated in activities regarding that pipeline.
Okay, in terms of, do you have any particular bias against the fossil fuel industry?
I do not. I've worked, I think my record reflects that I've worked also with fossil fuel companies when they are putting in infrastructure, things like pipelines. One of the things they have to deal with is trying to make sure they don't affect the various sites where there might be tribal interests. And so working directly with those pipeline companies to make sure that they're sited properly and in compliance with the law is something that I've also done. So I've worked with companies that are also involved in fossil fuels. I do not believe I have any bias against them, and I think my record would reflect that.
Ma'am, how you say your last name again?
Manglonia.
How long does it take to get from Saipan to here?
24 hours one way, door to door.
You said that very certain. That's a
I've done it many
long,
times.
So you also have cases in Guam, is that right?
Yes, I sit by designation.
Is there anything the committee can do to make your job easier?
Confirm me?
Yeah, that's a good answer. I just assumed you had the job, so yeah, let me not jump over that part. Seem to be well qualified. Everybody listening back in Saipan, she's doing good.
Yes.
So, how do you really, how long does it take you to get to Guam?
Well, Saipan and Guam are in the same archipelago, so I just fly down. It's about a 30-minute flight. Unfortunately, airline is the only way. Boat is by days. And so we're in the same time zone, makes it easier. There were the days when we would have 3 to 5 flights in a day. Nowadays, it's very restricted, so it does constrain, but thank goodness for modern technology. In 2021, I presided over a 7-week trial where I was doing the trial in Guam and then handling my cases virtually in Saipan, so I can move things along.
Okay. Thank you much.
Senator Hirono.